JP, thank you very much for joining us. Welcome back to the Proteas. Tell us how that's been going for you.
It's been great. Just thinking back to the last couple of days, and particularly I think back to Sunday when I was packing my bag and preparing to come back on tour, and I realized that I needed to go back into the garage and take out my South African blazer and tie. And it just dawned on me that, man, I certainly didn't think that I'd be pulling that out of the cupboard 2 years after retirement. So that was quite in some way, an emotional moment, and just reminiscing on the great times that I've had in the Proteas camp over the last 15 years, and obviously coming back now in a different capacity, trying to see how I can add value. But it's been a real privilege to be back.
Tell us about this different capacity and what role you'll be playing in the team.
Well, the title, I guess, is strategic consultant. And the way I see that is trying to add value wherever I can. So it's not necessarily honed in on a particular skill or department within the structure of the team. The way I see it is, having had the experience that I've had over the last 15 years and played in various World Cups, the T20 experience, is how can I contribute with that understanding and possibly being aware of certain things that might unfold. Obviously, I've played against many of these cricketers as well from different countries, played with. So how can I add value from that perspective as well? But also, more importantly for me, is having relationships with pretty much all the players and staff that are currently in the mix here, and just enhancing that, and just trying to see how I can add value to them on a personal capacity as well. I'm very fond on having one-on-one coffees and chats, so that's something that I'm looking forward to, and the goal is to somehow add value there.
It's only been a couple of days in the camp. What has been your impression of the preparedness of the team and just the environment in general?
I think the thing that stands out is certainly the attention to detail in terms of the skills. There's been some really good conversations, particularly that I've been part of over the last few days, just in terms of clarity of what the goal is. When I'm talking about goal, I'm not yes, the ultimate goal is obviously to win the World Cup, but I'm talking about the process and how clear, particularly from a management point of view, how clear the coaches are of what they would like to see from players, and ultimately holding each other accountable for that. And I think that has certainly been the standout, and that's obviously been driven by the head coach, Mark Boucher, who he drives that quite a bit, creating that clarity for players. So for me, that I've really enjoyed, and hopefully it manifests itself on the field in the next couple of weeks.
How crucial is role definition and just having that clarity in terms of putting together a campaign that's going to be successful ultimately?
I think ultimately role clarification is, if I put my player's hat on, that's ultimately what players want. They want to understand and make sure that when they go out and face those pressure moments, that there is clarity. And for me, it's in my capacity now, and obviously everybody in the technical staff want to make sure that they provide them with enough information, but also ask and facilitate the right conversations and ask the right questions for them to find the answers as well. I believe this is an environment, it's not a dictatorship. It's very much a facilitation of learning. And if we are in a position to ask the right questions, we'll collectively find the right answers.
It must be really interesting and quite surreal to have to put on both the player's hat and, having had the experience of putting a player's hat on and now being in a different position. How swift was that move for you mentally, and how did you handle retirement and getting out of that player space and then entering into this new journey?
The interesting thing about the new journey of coaching, it's not something that I sort of ran after. I think it found me. And that has been the interesting part of the journey of the last, call it 6 months. I think back to my current role as well as the Lions batting coach, how that unfolded was, you were asked to come into the environment. And that's what I've enjoyed, even particularly in this role as well. I've been asked to come in and see how I can add value. And for me, that's the learning experience. And yes, the journey's been short in terms of the transition. There's been some commentary in there as well. And there was always this idea of commentary and coaching sort of balancing each other out. And at some point, one was going to kind of leapfrog the other throughout the year. At the moment, it seems like it's coaching it in terms of what is on top at the moment. But I'm enjoying it. I really am. Like I said, those one-on-one connections are probably the standout. But, how can you leave somebody in a better place in terms of that conversation is what I aim for. And people just want to feel valued. People want to feel like they belong. And having had the experience of playing here for 15 years, I truly understand that. And it doesn't matter who you are in terms of playing 100 games, playing one game. There's always this need, this inherent need within ourselves to feel like you belong to something bigger than yourself. And that's what the Proteas is about. It's a representation of 60 million people. And there's great responsibility with that. But, just talking people through that and understanding what that responsibility looks like, to be seen as a role model, to live a certain way day in and day out, where you're giving your best, your level best every day. It can be challenging, and particularly in this day and age where we're living in a bubble life and things are restricted, you have to find ways to make sure that you're refreshed continuously and giving your best day in and day out for this badge.
And just speaking about the bubble life, you're here with your families, players' families as well, management families. How important is that aspect, just being able to open up the environment for families and to have, your loved ones traveling with you, particularly during these change times and in these bubble environments? A lot of people don't understand the bubble environment and the stresses and why people seeing players and other coaching staff in other countries seem to be struggling so much. Can you give us a bit of insight from your own, experiences on the bubble life and from your observations having come in here?
I think the first thing I have to say is that it's a massive sacrifice. And, one can look at that and think, wow, you kind of paid to do this, so you've just got to deal with it. But at the end of the day, we're still human beings. And, through that process comes challenges. You can even go through some depressive states because you can't handle the sort of compression that you feel. And coupled with that, particularly as a player, this expectation and pressure to perform, and particularly going into a World Cup and how you're going to handle that. So when it comes to this bubble life, it's important to have perspective and important to have a greater cause in terms of a purpose outside of the game as well. And this is where the families come in. And for me, the families play an integral part in calmness, a positive sort of distraction, if one can call it that, in that taking your mind away from the pressures and the demands of the game. Can you physically be present when you're with your family? And this is, I struggle with that too, as a player. And you can see it because, even if you're playing with your kids or with your family, you kind of drift into no man's land thinking about what's coming and so forth. But it's important for me to be able to acknowledge, be present. Because that's how you're going to make or have an influence in your family's life. I think about myself having 2 young girls. I have to somehow be present, even though there's pressures of what you are facing and doing right now. But I believe it's one of the best positive distractions one can have. But it's important that people understand that your families, they live this journey with you. They go through those challenges and struggles with you. I think about my wife, and having traveled with me for most of my career, she lives through all those experiences and is your number one supporter. So it's important to have that support structure in place.
And finally, your impressions of this team and their chances at the World Cup.
I'm very optimistic about what I've seen over the last couple of days. Obviously, I've just had a sort of outside look for a long period of time. I love what I'm seeing. I'm loving the conversations that's happening and the clarity, as we spoke about earlier. But also there's this belief within each other, which is great to see, and in many ways also contagious. You coming into an environment and you feel like guys know what they want to do. They believe that they can go all the way, and that's what you want to see when you're going into a World Cup. I've obviously been to World Cups and we had those experiences. We haven't gotten over the line, but if ever there's a chance, we just need a small glimpse and a hope, and you never know. So we got to go out there and give it all that we have, to make sure that we represent the band well.